A unique episode. You may have seen this article that came out not so long ago saying that EOS is not a blockchain. Well, today on the show, we have the man behind all of that research, Zak Cole. Zak's over on the West Coast. He is the CTO at Whiteblock, which is essentially a digital sandbox of sorts for blockchain developers. The article that says EOS is not a blockchain, it's a glorified cloud computing service, was the research that he and his team put on. Now that article came out about a month ago and blew up the crypto ecosystem, shared quite a lot over every major social network. And then about a week later, an article was put out on Medium by Thomas Cox, who was or is the interim executive director at EOS Alliance, said that yes, EOS is a blockchain. So today on the show, we're going to have Zak and Thomas and myself all discuss, is EOS a blockchain? So without further ado, I want to say first off, Thomas and Zak, thank you so much for being here. These are the kind of conversations, in my opinion, that we all need to be having. So I'll let Zak, since you are the one who said that EOS is not a blockchain, we'll start off with you, and I'll let you have the floor right now.
Cool, yeah, hey, how's it going? So first of all, I think we should separate a lot of the philosophical and political ideas from like actual technical discussion. Try to like maintain that because it's going to be really hard to prove or disprove anything that is just, completely subjective in nature. And since like the space lacks an essential degree of like standardization, and it's going to be really hard to say like, oh well, what is a blockchain, what isn't a blockchain. I feel like that's kind of just like marketing language. It's meant to like attract attention or something, and I feel like we should just focus on a hard technical discussion right now.
Okay.
So Thomas, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest that one of the things that maybe we've allowed ourselves to get caught up in as an industry is, we communicate in part on, Reddit and Twitter, and in part through the articles that do or don't get published on CoinDesk and Cointelegraph. And I think if you look back at, say, 12 months of coverage, any 12 months, you'll see it's disproportionately innuendo and hype and things that somebody hopes will spur somebody else to buy or sell a particular token at a particular price. And that may be lovely for folks who are speculating. It's not so great, not so useful really for folks. I think Zak and I are both in this camp who want to, build the decentralized future. And so, what are the interesting points of departure between the EOS design envelope and the Ethereum design envelope to take two? And what can we learn from each other, and what does that mean for the future of our industry? And what I was actually kind of secretly delighted by Zak's article, in part because it forced me to ask some hard questions inside the community, like, why would someone think we're not a blockchain? We've been calling ourselves a blockchain for a year and a half, aren't we? Because I'm not nearly as technical as Zak is, and I didn't know for sure. And what that drove to the surface was that the Ethereum design philosophy includes that every node has to agree with every other node, not just that these transactions were applied, but on what the current state of the chain is. Cryptographically agree, and we all agree on what the hash of that state is. Is that fair, Zak?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that that's limited necessarily to Ethereum. And I'd also like to encourage us to
Ethereum does it, but not exclusively.
Keep the discussion apart from like EOS versus Ethereum, because I don't really have a dog in the fight. I don't.
There's
really
a much
care
bigger, yeah, we got a much bigger industry than just two.
Which platform wins? Because in my opinion, I don't feel like the future holds one blockchain to like rule them all. I feel like it's
that would be a weird future.
Yeah, like an interoperable
if all
space.
Wheels vehicles were standardized on somebody's scooter. And we got rid of all the RVs.
I think that those are concepts that were addressed by Bitcoin, by not just Ethereum. So these are things that are present. And what's really particularly interesting to me about the EOS governance process and the DPoS consensus algorithm is that we're trying to reduce the computational overhead of these systems that have worked mathematically. It all adheres to like the dry concepts of engineering. But now we're starting to reduce the computational overhead, and now it's being offset by some degree of human interaction and participation, which kind of convolutes the subject. And it feels like a step backwards because now what's the difference between something like EOS or some sort of other DPoS or POS model and a bank that's built on a cloud platform? Because you still rely on a degree of like centralization. You're still relying on trusted third parties, which I think is an essential concept that blockchain was designed to eliminate.
Who are the trusted third parties that you're imagining in this
scenario? The block producers are the trusted third parties.
And that is probably the biggest criticism of the EOS service as a whole, is that you can get certain block producers that will work together, and not so many of them. That's the biggest thing that I keep seeing come up time and time again through whether it's Twitter or Reddit or something that would give the most credence to the argument that it's not a properly decentralized platform.
Yeah, I would say that the for Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the proof of work chains have that 51% attack as sort of the gremlin that everyone says, well, there could be a 51% attack, which is unrealistic in the case of a big one. But for, DPoS shifts that to be, there could be a collusion either among voters or a collusion among block producers selected by voters. In either way, if there is such collusion, they could conspire to lie to the rest of the community. And it only takes 7 block producers out of 21 to refuse to sign and therefore prevent the advancing of the irreversible block. And it would take 15 to hijack the chain completely.
Right. So in that situation, those scenarios are accounted for through mathematical models and like objective protocols. So while a 51% attack could present some degree of, vulnerability, like I'm not disagreeing with that. It's just how do we properly address these issues and concepts? So I feel like a lot of the security mechanisms and more traditional proof of work-based systems have been disregarded in the design of EOS in order to provide a higher degree of performance and transactional throughput. So, and that results in
I would say disregarded. I would hold on that thought, but go ahead and finish whatever you're going to say.
I mean, that's pretty much the thought. I think that a lot of essential security is kind of not really accounted for or addressed, and the result is like a highly centralized system.
Yeah, one man's highly centralized is another person's decentralized. Certainly, anything that's less centralized than Ethereum looks centralized to an Ethereum person. I mean, what was it? Plato said that all virtues exist on a continuum, and if you're bold, the timid person thinks you're rash, and if you're bold, the rash person thinks you're timid. So, are centralized, decentralized? Aren't those on a continuum?
No, not necessarily. I think that this is like computer science, so it is binary logic. Things are or they aren't. While there are several forms of decentralization, I mean, there's like political and architectural decentralization. I think that EOS is both politically and architecturally centralized. I mean, systems should be centralized architecturally, but I think it's a political issue now.
I would say that the design philosophy of EOS was to move some of the work traditionally handled by code and hand that over to other structures. And here I'd refer to Lawrence Lessig's model of constraints on technology systems. He suggests that there's 4 forces at play. This is Lessig's 1998 publication. It's called the New Chicago School Model. And what he describes, this is just from memory, so if I get it wrong, forgive me, is that there are legal forces that could be in play, social forces that could be in play, market forces, and code, or what in the real world would be, geography or physics. And the beauty and the simplicity and the brilliance of both Bitcoin and Ethereum is to rely almost exclusively on code and markets, and to use code to set up market forces that keep the chain secure. And it's worked brilliantly for 4 years for Ethereum and 10 years for Bitcoin. And they look to be fairly slow and fairly energy expensive. And so the experiment is, what if we let token holders vote for block producers, and you got a pool of block producers, you pick, you can change, you don't like this guy, you think he's colluding, vote him out. If block producers are a commodity, if voters are activist, if collusion is detectable, then that could remain secure if people are vigilant. And certainly going from 3 transactions a second to 3,000 might be attractive to some people for at least some use cases.
Do you think that EOS addresses all of those issues and the governance model addresses all of them effectively?
I would wait at least 4 years before I would say that we address all of anything. I know
but
we're doing our best, but I've already seen the at least partial failure of several of the things that I thought we could count on, like voters not voting for collusive block producers. We're seeing at least a certain amount of tolerance. And that is actually a cultural thing. And I was kind of shocked when it first happened, and I'm slowly getting used to it, that at least some token holders are perfectly fine with 2 or 3 block producers buying votes from other voters. And that's like bizarre to me. It's undermining the chain. It's bad for the token.
And just to interject really quickly there, Thomas, do we know of the number of EOS tokens, how many are actively voting versus how many are just sitting there?
About 25%.
Okay, thanks.
So out of the billion, it's about 250 million, and that doesn't include the 100 million from the Block.One has in reserve.
Okay.
Do you think that this is a socially scalable system?
That is a great question. I know that when this similar system is underlies Cardano, and when Charles Hoskinson was asked the same question, his response is also mine, which is, if you start to see so much corruption that it starts to harm the security of the chain, your basic response is to fork the chain and zero out the wallets of the voters who are colluding.
Okay, but then that also kind of negates the entire fundamental principles of what makes a blockchain unique, in my opinion. And that's minimizing trust assumptions in a system where these
Which
protocols.
Trust assumptions?
Well, trust assumptions as in, I'm trusting block producers. I have to trust them. I have to trust the community to vote in the favor of the community. I have to trust that the system is properly implemented, that everybody is going to do what they're supposed to be doing. And that's pretty much what it boils down to, is everyone doing what they're supposed to be doing. When we eliminate those aspects algorithmically using protocols, right, and code and math and cryptography, we reduce that overhead and that dependency on those human factors. So that way we can create a system that's autonomous essentially and can function without any reliance on those social aspects.
I would say minimizing social aspects is probably wise where it can be done. And then the question is, how much can you and should you automate? How much can you and should you get away? And I think that we're coming at it from 2 angles. I know that the Ethereum folks are doing, yet more brilliant things with Casper. We got the Tendermint folks who have a constitution. Cardano uses a constitution. So there's folks who are implementing aspects of the social force that Lessig talks about to augment code and markets. And I don't know what the sweet spot's going to be. And we might find out over time that there are 3 or 4 different designs that seem to hold together. Just like, 4-wheel vehicles now, mostly you've got pickup trucks and RVs and kids' go-karts. And there's like weird variants, but there's like some standards that we've all settled on. I think we're much too early to settle on that yet. But yeah, I think that the experiment of 100% computer science and 0% anything else may have reached, I'm not saying it's going to reach its limits. It's reached some interesting impasses, and it's unsurprising that folks are turning to 2 of the other forces to try to push the performance envelope.
Right, but
I think that's wise.
at what point does making those sacrifices and making those trade-offs At what point is that going backwards? Like a constitution is entirely a human concept, and it's meant to be written and
Correct.
interpreted by human beings.
Yep.
So how does that create a better model for a computational environment?
Well, if all you want is a computational environment, then it doesn't. But are smart contracts just computational objects, or do they represent something that has meaning to people? At what point do you get out of your system and things start to have meaning?
What do you mean when things start to have meaning?
At some point, you care about, not just that things are mathematically correct, but that what they're correct about matters to you.
Right, but I think one of the most important things is that I have an asset that I own and control. No other party can influence their decision or power over my property, right? So that means that if I have this asset today, I should be rest assured that I have access and continued access and control to the nature of that asset tomorrow, right?
And you would love that to be true, and yet Bitcoin has forked, Ethereum has forked.
But that doesn't mean that my asset is any less under my control. I can choose
Are you sure?
Yeah, I can choose to remove my asset from the ecosystem. I can transact with any other individual as I see fit.
You can do that on any of the other blockchains as well.
Right, but except in the case of EOS, what happens if I have a token amount, like I have amount of tokens, and let's say 3 years from now, what's going to happen to my tokens? Let's say that I don't vote.
Yeah, okay, and?
Are my tokens, are my assets still going to be available to me?
Why would they not be?
Because Article 15 has a termination of agreement in the EOS Constitution that says a member is automatically released from all revocable obligations under this Constitution 3 years after the last transaction signed by that member is incorporated in the blockchain. After 3 years of inactivity, an account may be put up for auction and the proceeds distributed to all members according to the system contract provisions that in effect for such redistribution.
Right, and since you've read that, you know that term exists, and so you know that your property, just like if you own a house in an HOA area, has certain restrictions on what color you can paint it. And if you don't do things like, in the house example, pay your property taxes, you'll lose your house. In the case of EOS, if you don't transact on the chain, you might, not must, but might have your account forfeited. Now, I don't think that's a good example. I think the community should vote that out, maybe. But that is the rule that the group agreed to. And if you bought,
right, but what you're describing,
so you're agreeing to a rule, and what, you don't want to be held to it?
No, I don't want to be held to it. That's not why I choose
then
to.
don't buy the tokens.
Well, then why not just use a traditional financial system? Then what's the benefit? It's a
so you got one aspect of one agreement you don't like, so you want to throw the whole system out.
No, that was just a simple explanation or example off the top of my head.
Okay.
So I mean, you're drawing parallels between traditional structures and these new ones that we're trying to create and present, right? So I don't think that the new structure in the case of EOS is necessarily presenting anything that's uniquely valuable in a way that other alternative blockchain systems present. What happens is that I have total control. The mere fact that this can be done at certain points may imply that it can be done at any point. Who's to say? The governing body now, because this is some sort of hierarchy or oligarchy that's being implemented. I want to be able to transact freely.
I think plutocracy is the word you're looking for, and it's ruled by the token holders, right? So
but it's not ruled by the token holders, because the token holders don't have a vote to say that this person's assets should be removed from them. The block producers themselves can arbitrarily censor transactions, essentially.
Well, isn't that true of every block producer or every miner on every system ever built?
No, because that operates in accordance.
You can choose which, at the individual producer level, you can choose which transactions to include or not include.
Sure, but that's a population of 21 within a distributed and decentralized peer-to-peer network.
Ever-changing group of 21, yes.
Sure, but I can also
don't like the design of the system. Don't use the system, but don't say the design doesn't work for anybody.
No. It's not my job to tell you guys like what's right and what's wrong. We do research, we conduct tests, and then we make observations. That's it. So, I'm not telling people to not invest or not use the system or anything like that. I don't care. I'm trying to figure out better solutions. And the way to
Zach,
do that is to be transparent and objective in our analysis.
so it sounds to me, Zach, like what you keep coming back to is the underlying trust of the network that is EOS right now. So if that's right, and I'm correct, and it sounds like a lot of what you said over the last, say, 10 or 12 minutes is if people can trust EOS, what would you...
Well, don't say trust EOS. I think it's trusting block producers specifically with Zach's point. Zach, is that right?
Yeah, the block producers.
Yeah,
EOS
yeah.
is just a protocol. I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what would you
And
say,
the reason
Zach?
I say that is I think it's important to distinguish that, Ryan, because
Totally.
what we're basically saying is in order to get the higher performance, the faster block production time, the roughly 3,000 transactions per second, occasional peaks. I don't think that's a sustained throughput, but quite a bit faster. That comes right now at the price of extending a limited amount of trust in a pool of people who can have their powers taken away from them every 2 minutes and 6 seconds if the voters choose. And
if the voters are even aware of that, though.
If the voters are even aware, and if
Fair.
they're paying attention,
Fair.
or if
Right.
they've proxied to somebody who pays attention on their behalf, in which case you've got the principal agent problem. I absolutely agree that this is a risk point, a potential vulnerability, and it's a big one.
So
And it's one that has to be taken seriously. You would be a fool. if you weren't aware
and
of
so
it.
with that
Now,
clarification,
I think that what you've seen is that the block producers who've shown up in the community to take these positions are mutually independent. They're very high performing. They take this role extremely seriously, and they're very devoted to protocol and to the community both. And so if you had to extend your trust into anybody, I think the group of folks who have shown up to be block producer candidates deserve that trust, and they exhibit that on a daily basis. We could increase that with things like a slashable bond, but there's no mathematical guarantee that they'll never collude. All you have is fallback positions, including.
Can we agree, though, that that the role of the block producer is kind of counterintuitive to the essential definition of a peer-to-peer network?
Oh, I think it's the opposite of that. I think it's highly intuitive, because you'll see that all peer-to-peer networks have scaling issues if you don't occasionally concentrate things.
Well, it's not a matter of scaling issues. It's a matter of me being able to directly transact with one of my peers without any intermediary or trusted third party.
And have it recorded on a shared ledger.
No. Let's just talk about peer-to-peer networks without even the.
Well, if you don't
concept
want a
of the
shared ledger, why do you want EOS?
No, that's not the question. This is a thought experiment. So let's just say that would you define EOS as a peer-to-peer network? Under
by the definition you just floated, no. I'm not sure that anything qualifies as a peer-to-peer network under the definition you just floated.
Like BitTorrent, or there's plenty of examples of peer-to-peer networks.
Don't you have to rely on somebody to move packets between the two of you?
No, not necessarily. I can connect an Ethernet cable directly to my friend who's right here, and we can transact directly.
It doesn't sound like BitTorrent.
It
It sounds like an operating system command. Okay.
But that's the essential concept of the network, right?
Well, yeah.
Oh, I think I broke up a bit.
I still hear you, Zach. I think our connection.
You don't have to.
Okay.
Oh, there you are, Thomas. I think we lost you.
Yep, we lost you for
Yeah,
about
get a
10
little-
seconds.
Spotty on the sense too. Well, let's just say all ISPs suck.
Yeah. But anyway, sorry. I hate that interrupted the flow. But what were you saying?
I have no idea what I was just saying. What was the
We're
last
talking
topic?
about
peer-to-peer.
peer-to-peer.
Yeah. Well, look, if you want to say I can do peer by connecting my computer to my friend's computer directly, it's like, yeah, and what's your point? That's not a peer-to-peer protocol. That's two guys getting together. And so
Right.
what? If you want to,
We're just talking about networks. Let's just talk about essential networks. Like, oh shit.
Yeah, I think we just lost him again.
All right.
Hang on. We had him solid for about 19 minutes, and then in this last 60 seconds.
protocol that
There he is.
Thomas, we're losing you. If you can hear us, we're losing you a little bit. And it looks like
Yeah, I'm
he's,
sharing a network with someone who's, I think, streaming videos right now. I am very sorry.
it's okay.
I
It
may have to
happens.
turn my video off for a little while just to kind of reduce the lag.
Sure, that's,
Sure.
if you got to do what you got to do.
Sorry, dudes.
Yeah, no worries.
So, yeah, yay you that you and your friend can connect your computers together. But you know, if you want to make some sweeping promise that you have 0 third parties between the two of you, okay, then you're not relying on a protocol, you're not relying on ISPs, you're not relying on Ethernet.
We're talking about trusted third parties, right? That would have to do things on our behalf or execute on our behalf or act as an intermediary between these relations.
Zach, let me
Like
build on
say,
that for a moment. Zach, if I can, what would be some things that you would like to see that you've come up with across in your experience and research that would make you more comfortable and more trusting of the block producer method?
or needing less trust.
Yeah, so I think that something like an implementation of similar to like the concept of transparent servers as presented by Hal Finney would be a pretty good way to do that. Allowing users to directly audit block producers through code or something that's tangible. And I think that also allowing anybody to interact or participate in the process of validating transactions would be much more effective and more reliable and secure. But then when you do that, you're pretty much taking away the value that EOS is providing. And don't get me wrong, like I think that what you guys are doing is great. I have a lot of respect for it. I think that it's valuable, a valuable experiment. But I think that the use case is probably not best suited for a public blockchain or a network like on that level. You know.
Who's to say? It seems to be doing okay for now, and you know, for all I know, tomorrow we'll have a sudden spike in collusion, and we'll either collapse or have to fork. You know,
Right.
I don't know any more than I know whether one of the other proof of work chains will get a catastrophic 51% attack.
Of course. Yep. So, yeah, I think that there's some essential issues that can be addressed. One thing that I have a problem with is that there is no mathematical proof or corresponding formal verification for any of the protocols or processes used in EOS. Why is that?
Well, since I'm not a coder and I wasn't part of that aspect of the development of the software, I couldn't say even if your assertion's true in the first place.
Okay, yeah, because there's no, so generally when you're developing or designing some sort of large scale system, what you do is you represent all those processes mathematically. So that way it acts as a blueprint, right? So you wouldn't just start building a skyscraper without a blueprint, right? You wouldn't start designing a large scale distributed system or any sort of simple application, I suppose, for that matter, without some sort of mathematical proof to represent the processes, right? So a lot of the issues here is that since there is no proof on that level, I can't really argue one way or the other in an objective manner because now it's just down to opinion, essentially.
Well, Zach, I'm sorry, but I'm not in a position to even agree with you that proof doesn't exist. All I can tell you is I was never asked for it by anybody prior to you, and it's never come up before. I think Bart Wyatt would be the guy I would ask, and I'm sorry he's not.
Well, I've already brought this up to all of those guys plenty of times, and I don't ever get an answer. So I think that this is something that's, I'm sure I'm not the only person who's brought this up. Maybe not inside the like EOS community, but I mean definitely outside of the community. If you look at any sort of process for algorithm design, I mean that's the first step, you know.
Well, and I've heard many people say that formal verification is a very important step, and I'm surprised more people don't do it.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that that's something that's really needed in the space. But what I'm getting at is that there's a lot of subjectivity, there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of philosophy involved. And the way that we can weed out all of that nonsense is by reducing all of these functions to their mathematical representation. And that allows us to take a deterministic and objective lens on how these systems perform. So, which is another thing is like we performed quite thorough performance tests and we're getting a lot of pushback about the transactional throughput that our tests indicated. So do you have any comments on that? I'd like to.
Well, I admit I was a little bemused when I found that the tests you conducted in a laboratory setting, which you'd normally expect would go faster, ended up going quite a bit slower than the current mainnet runs in the wild, which is a little it's a little bit like the guy who's tried to prove mathematically that bumblebees can't fly, and yet here they are flying. So at some point you have to say, what's wrong with my tests then, if I can replicate what's being seen out there in the real world today.
Well, we replicated for 3,000 to 4,000 transactions per second under the circumstances and conditions that the block producers and the clients that were conducting the transactions were either on the same machine or within the same local area network. I didn't bother including that in our report because, one, I didn't know that you guys were claiming 4,000 transactions per second, which is right on par with what we were, with what our results were. But I didn't bother including that because those aren't indicative of real world performance, just because everything's happening in a controlled.
Claiming it in general. We've got it on record. It's on the chain. You can go back and replay the transaction log and see that we've got a peak of 3,900 and some transactions per second.
So that's the block Twitter stuff, right? Which are pretty practically
very lightweight transactions.
Empty transactions with very little associated metadata. So even taking that assumption that that these clients that were transacting were on the same local area network,
no, they weren't on the network. Machine. They're out there in the world. These are block producers scattered all around the globe, in Europe, in the U.S. We've got one in Africa. We got block producers.
So we weren't able to achieve those same numbers once we introduced latency.
Zach, I introduced packet loss. Match those numbers, but the fact that you couldn't match those numbers doesn't mean the numbers don't exist. It means you couldn't match them.
Right. Well, we did match them under those circumstances, so our system was capable of matching them.
Either you're claiming that all the block producers are in the same data center, or you have to admit that you couldn't replicate the real-world transactional throughput of the existing mainnet today.
I have no idea what the internal structure of the block producer network looks like, which is another security vulnerability, I think, for users. So we were able to achieve the same numbers under very, very certain and specific circumstances. So then I would also mention that, I mean, if this were truly indicative of the real world performance, why was that number only achieved like once, and why is the average 50 to 100 transactions per second, or within the same window that we presented? I mean, because you guys are referring to the EOS network monitor, right? So that's 100 transactions per second, 50 transactions per second on a daily basis, because I check that stuff. We keep data relating to these performance metrics.
Less than 5% full right now, because there aren't other than block Twitter, there aren't that many people who want to do that many transactions. We're still doing, I guess that puts us only 10 times faster than Ethereum?
I don't know. It depends. I mean, we could sacrifice a lot of the security protocols that come along with Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever and scale to, 1 million transactions per second under the same circumstances. I mean, so all I'm saying is that, I mean, you're making a lot of security sacrifices in the system to try to compensate and provide a higher degree of throughput. A year ago, throughput was advertised as 1 million transactions per second. Then it dwindled down to like 500,000, and then 250,000, and now they're settling on like this value. I was under the impression you
talk about the future of the industry rather than rehashing the marketing promises of an ICO.
No, I don't. I'm not trying to like accuse or be accusatory or anything like that. I'm just trying to understand the design process. Yes, yeah. No, I just want to understand the design process. I want to understand
well, one of the other things that was mentioned back in that time frame was multi-threading.
Right.
And multi-threading has turned out to be devilishly hard. Who's surprised by that? And the original belief was that we could get multi-threading out before launch, and the answer is no.
Do you think that multi-threading would have like a dramatic impact on?
You're asking me what I think? No, I think that really good multi-threading, if you could figure out how to do that architecturally, might give you a 10x, but probably not much more than that. And that's what we saw back in the 10, 20 years ago with the Sybase versus Oracle wars. Is that a really good monolithic architecture can do darn well, and multi-threading is hard. You don't get as much parallelism as you thought you would.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to bring that up and ask a question about that because, A lot of people have been accusing our results or our methodologies being improper or incorrect.
Well,
And,
I think I'm still accusing your methodology of being improper, actually.
okay, so then that's what I would want to know why. And
If you can't replicate in a lab what you're seeing on a daily basis in the wild, then there's
but
something wrong with your lab.
we replicated in our lab the 3 to 4,000 transactions per
But
second.
only with no latency. I promise you there's latency on the mainnet.
Only within latency? Only without latency.
You took away latency
Yes.
and
So what I'm
matched
saying
the
is that-
throughput of a system that has latency.
Right. What I'm
Dude,
saying
I don't know
is,
what you're doing wrong.
what I'm saying is
Don't-
that
Don't ask me. I don't know.
what I'm saying is that we could be, if we're a block producer and we're running stress tests or internal tests, and we're interacting between a client that's running within our lab on a laptop or maybe somewhere else, I don't know, right, on the machine of the block producer, those metrics and those values are still going to be reflected in the mainnet. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, that doesn't mean that they're not reflective in the mainnet, but that's not indicative of like real world performance. When, you know, there's actually transaction value, when there's actually wide area network conditions, all that
I
stuff.
think we're in agreement that the transactions that made up the 4,000 were the lightest weight transactions humanly possible. And
Right.
that when you try to put in more substantive transactions, your throughput absolutely will go down.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's
All right.
nothing. There's nothing objectionable about that.
All right, great. So then how was our methodology improper and correct then?
Well, you yourself said that you could not figure out how to match the transaction throughput of the EOS mainnet without taking away all the latencies that the EOS mainnet actually does have. Now, I don't know
Right.
why you couldn't do that.
And then I say that the results,
not on me.
then I say that the results for 3,996, which were only achieved one time, and haven't ever matched and consistently have been between the same numbers and values that we presented. I'm saying that those metrics, that value, can still be the result of internal stress testing where I'm an actor, I'm like a block producer or somebody, right? And I'm transacting between my client, which is the one sending the transaction, on my laptop to the block producer machine itself, which could be 1 foot away. And I can still conduct those on the main net. And then I can still say, hey, look, we're doing really good on this main net.
Okay. I think
Do you see what I'm saying?
I think what you're suggesting, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it was a thought, is that if block producer, Fred it's his turn to do blocks and he gets to do his 12 blocks in a row over 6 seconds. And during that 6 seconds, he uses his local machine to blast a bunch of transactions in real fast.
Yes.
He could get this wacky big number
Yes.
Once every 2 minutes.
Yes.
And the short answer is, maybe that happened. I don't know.
Okay.
And it's a shame you can't do that on Ethereum or Bitcoin.
Okay. All right. Cool. I just wanted to.
They can't handle it at all.
Okay. So if you're admitting that that's a possibility,
Of course, it's possible.
then our methodology may actually be correct. I mean,
might actually be correct. Okay, I'll grant you that it's possible. And I haven't seen your setup, and you've admitted you don't know what our topology was either, and that's okay. And if we go away from peak TPS, I promise you, back when I worked at Oracle Corporation 20 years ago, there were TPS wars all the time between Oracle, Sybase, Ingress, and Formix, and none of them meant anything in the real world ever,
right?
Because they were these super tuned. How can I make it faster? I can make it faster.
Yes.
And it doesn't actually lead to better databases, better database design, better computer science. It's mostly used by people who want to pump up a marketing message. And in the process of pushing that envelope, they did do things like interesting forms of caching, interesting forms of pipelining, interesting ways of doing parallelization. What Oracle did with clustered systems kind of blew my mind when I started reading about it, and their ability to do high-speed memory communication and coordinate the caches inside the memories of loosely clustered machines. Wacky stuff. Very, very cool and cutting edge.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm glad that we can agree on that. And I'd also like to say that, I mean, I'm not an EOS hater or anything like that. I think that if you guys are innovating and you're building, then that's awesome. And I want to do everything I can to help. But
I think you're a skeptic, and I think your skepticism is going to continue to drive greater awareness and greater care on
Right.
all sides. And I think that's a very
So-
important contribution to make, and I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you. Well, we're skeptical of all systems equally. We've run the same tests and had the same harsh critique on Ethereum. We've run tests for 51% attacks where we've replicated those environmental conditions and tried to observe what the problem is. And we reported on that, and we've done, we've called out their crap performance and the security vulnerabilities that are presented by, Uncle Ray, for instance. I mean, these are things that this is our job. We're not like, this isn't a beauty contest. It's our job to be critics, essentially, and understand what makes these systems, what breaks these systems, because then we can figure out how to build them better. And that's all I'm about. So.
Hey, Thomas, if I can jump in and ask a question here. Your comment a moment ago, you started to mention TPS, and this is a question I actually wanted to ask you. There was a comment I saw on Reddit as I was preparing for this, and granted, it is Reddit, so keep that in mind. But I did want to at least hear from your side. This is what the comment says, and this was in Zak's favor, saying that no, EOS is not a blockchain. So the comment says. It's centralized, mutable, just like a database. Its TPS cannot be compared with blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum because TPS on an immutable blockchain is secured usually by hash power, while in EOS it's arbitrary and decided by voting through a bunch of block producers or whales. EOS is designed to support huge TPS without blockchain features like censorship resistance, immutability, etc., so on and so on. So I was just curious, along the lines of the TPS, what do you say to people who say things like that?
I would encourage them to get a little more educated and stop reading other people's Reddit posts and letting other people do their thinking for them. In particular, the idea that EOS is mutable is laughable. There's nothing about it that's mutable. The closest people come to and that would be done with a new transaction in a new block where you would send it back again. How is that different from what you would do in Bitcoin or Ethereum if you sent something back to somebody? The difference being that we have on-chain instead of off-chain mechanisms for doing some of those things. And you can do the same thing in an Ethereum smart contract. If you set it up, you look at OpenLaw or SageWise, who've been doing very innovative work on Ethereum for arbitration. And have started to do some things on EOS now. So yeah, the idea that somehow because we take arbitration seriously and are trying to be friendly to commercial usage, that somehow that makes the blockchain mutable is just absurd.
I think that people are probably going to hype up that fact. Yeah, overreact, because I think that one reason I would claim EOS does not present immutability is because according to the research that I did that was trying to find some sort of mathematical proof, what I found was coming from Dan Larimer, where he claimed finality is instant, right? So that means that as soon as a transaction is committed to a block.
Did he say that about the EOS mainnet?
This was from like June or something like that. So I don't know if this was from the EOS mainnet or not.
I think he might have been referring to his plan to roll out the BFT add-on on top of DPoS in order to speed up. Right now, finality is about 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, so 2 or 3 minutes. So that's another issue, is that this should be represented mathematically, and that would that would clear up a lot of confusion, right? Because then we could say, all right, here are the rules. These are the rules that are enforced by math. This is the single point of truth. These are the definitions, So, but according to what I found that was presented in the white paper, that was presented in Medium posts by Dan Larimer, finality was instant, right? And
I had to see that and see what he was talking about. That doesn't sound at all right.
Well,
and I don't recall. I was in Blacksburg. I worked with Dan for the better part of 9 months, and I never recall him saying that. So that's.
I'll gladly link you offline to the post in question. So the reason that I would say that is because, one, if finality is instant and there are forking events that are possible within EOS, then those transactions and those blocks are reverted. So state is not necessarily.
Well, all conclusions derived from false antecedents are wrong. And so since we know that finality is an instant, then any rationalization or any conclusion you draw from, well, if it's instant, then it's not instant. So what's your point?
Well, I'm just basing this off of the math that was presented. But also that, that needs to be represented mathematically as well. So we can't really argue, or it's kind of like a moot point to try to discuss right now.
Yep, I agree.
So
Fair enough. Well, guys, look, we've gone for 40 minutes and 30 seconds. We've had quite a good conversation so far. This is probably just for the first one, probably a fair time to wrap it up. So you guys have been awesome so far. And like I said, when I started this, these are the kind of conversations we need to have, rather than like we're laughing about people on Twitter or the random flame wars on Reddit. This is the type of stuff I'm looking for the community to build up. So Thomas and Zach, thanks a ton for coming on and doing this. Do you guys have any closing words? Zach, I'll let you say anything last, and then Thomas, you have the last word if you'd like to.
Sure.
No, I'm fine. I mean, completely, I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for having us on. Thomas, is great getting a chance to talk to you, and I hope that we can continue a dialogue and discussion. And I think that these are these concepts that we're discussing and we're arguing are not specific to EOS or Ethereum or any system. This is something that's highly relevant and necessary for the entire space. And if we want to continue building and providing real world solutions, I think it's vital that we continue these discussions, provide these definitions, and act accordingly.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, Thomas, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll end this.
Super. And I'll try it with my camera on just in case.
He's back.
Just hoping it doesn't cut out again. Yeah, I think that it's really important that that hosts like you encourage us to have these conversations, that folks like Zach continue to be skeptical and test and try things out. I think it's important that publishers of software like Block.One and others take seriously Zach's and other people's concerns about mathematical proofs and formal verification. And that's what we have to do as an industry, is always raise the bar on each other. I'm also encouraged that IEEE has put together a blockchain standards group that I've started joining their meetings, that we can do things like standardize our nomenclature. I mean, the idea that, to dispute what is a blockchain, hopefully at some point we'll have a technical definition we can all agree on, although that would make, I'm sure, Coinbase CoinDesk very sad. They would not have that headline anymore. And I would encourage folks who are interested in the governance aspects in particular to keep an eye out for the International Society for the Study of Decentralized Governance. That is a cross-blockchain organization formed in part by the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology just a few months ago, and I'm a member of that. And we're trying to, publish things in advance the global understanding of what blockchain governance is and needs to be. So we're in the very early days of a very interesting revolution. And as long as we keep moving in the right direction towards decentralization and higher performance both, we're doing the right things.
Absolutely. Okay, guys. Well, Thomas, Zach, thanks a ton for coming on again. Everyone at home, thanks for watching. Like this, share it, whatever you want to do.